We've isolated this curvy future eyebrow object here inside our image. But what we want to do is we want to rotate it around, and we also need to duplicate it as well. So how are we going to pull this off? Well, we're going to use one of my favorite commands inside Photoshop. He's called Free Transform. And you know, I use him so often. I'll bet you I use him every single time I launch Photoshop and I go to do something. So this guy's going to allow us to take an object and scale it and rotate it and move it around, you know, things like this, right? And he'll allow us to edit objects that are either isolated by a selection, like we have here, or an object that's isolated on his own separate layer. And of course, we'll talk about layers in just a little while. So I still have my marching ants here, which is great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to head up to the Edit menu, all the way up at the top, and then look for Free Transform. The keyboard shortcut for Free Transform is so easy to remember, Control or Command T, that I hardly ever go to the Edit menu. In fact, sometimes I even forget where the actual command for Free Transform is. I gotta go, is it Edit or is it Image? Oh yeah, it's Edit. Edit Free Transform. So I'm always using Control or Command T, in other words. Now, as soon as I choose the Free Transform command, notice I get the same frame wrapping around my object that we saw earlier. As a matter of fact, the command that we saw earlier was called Transform Selection, and the Transform Selection command is actually based off of the Free Transform command. So everything that we saw earlier related to scaling and adjusting our selections now applies here, but it's going to affect the selected object itself. For instance, I can grab the edge here and I can tug this guy way out to stretch him out like this. Or maybe I want to crank him up larger like this, right? Or maybe I want to grab a corner and I want to scale him all the way down, something like that. Now let me show you a couple of neat tricks here and then we'll actually get our eyebrow into place. You'll notice here that I've gone and completely distorted and kind of destroyed this object, right? If I want to get out of what I've done, if I realize I've made a mistake, all I need to do is simply hit the Escape key on my keyboard. And what that does is that simultaneously gets me out of the Free Transform and it takes me all the way back to where I started. So in other words, no damage done. Now I'm going to flip back into my Free Transform. Once again, Control or Command T on your keyboard. And what I'm going to do now is, rather than just dragging on one of the corner handles, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Shift key and drag on one of the corner handles. And while I'm holding down the Shift key, what's happening is the width and the height of this selected object are scaling in proportion to one another. In other words, I'm not distorting the object. Another neat trick that I can do is I can hold down the Option key or the Alt key and Shift at the same time, and what I can do is I can scale this guy from the center. In other words, holding down Alt or Option allows me to scale from the middle of the object. If I let go of Alt or Option, now I'm scaling from a corner, right? And I don't really like scaling from corners, I'll be honest. I like scaling from the center. That's just me. One other thing I want to show you here very quickly. There's a whole lot that you can do with the Free Transform, by the way, but I'm just giving you the down and dirty here. The other thing that we can do is when I bring my cursor outside of this frame, very similar to what we saw with the crop tool, notice that my cursor now changes to a curved double-headed arrow, meaning that if I click and drag, I can actually rotate this object. Okay? Something like this. All right, so there you go. That's sort of the gist of the Free Transform. Now let's actually get our object placed inside our mechanical face. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Escape to get me all the way back to where we started. And I'm going to hit Control or Command T on my keyboard. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this guy all the way around, something like this, right? And then what I'll do is I'll bring my cursor inside the frame here, and I can actually drag this guy around on screen. So I'm going to go and position him above my eye here, my first eye, my left-hand eye, maybe something like that. Maybe I want to scale him up just a little bit. I'm holding down the Shift key to scale him up. Maybe something like that, maybe a little bit more. Maybe I want it to look like the eyeball, or not to be gross, but the eye socket kind of fits into the eyebrow, you know, something like that, right? Kind of cool. Whatever you want, right? You can really sit here and fiddle for as long as you like, right? There we go, maybe something like that. Okay, again, you can use, by the way, your arrow keys on your keyboard to kind of tap around to position this guy. There we go, something like that. I'm going to hit enter on my keyboard. That locks in the free transformation, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down, I'm still on the move tool, don't forget, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and duplicate this guy out, just like that, okay? So now we have a duplicate of our eyebrow, but he's an exact copy of the eyebrow. Maybe that's what I want, I have no idea. But I think what I want to do is I think I want to actually flip this guy. In other words, I want to mirror this object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head up to the Edit menu. I'm going to head down to, notice we have Free Transform, and then we have Transform, and notice all the things we can do here. Scale, rotate, skew, perspective, warp, rotating. Well, I want to flip this guy horizontally, just like that, okay? So then now I have this mirror image, and maybe I'll just sort of position this guy, you know, maybe something like this. If I wanted to, I could get back into Free Transform and adjust this guy even further if I wanted to. When you're happy with your mechanical face, go ahead and deselect Control or Command D, and you might want to zoom out to see how things are starting to look here inside our image.